The identity of the Wampanoag is inseparable from their name. Wampanoag, anglicized as Wampanoag, is derived from the Algonquian words Wôpan, dawn, and Ak, people. To be a person of the first light is not merely a poetic title, it is a statement of geopolitical and spiritual primacy. Located at the easternmost edge of the North American continent, the Wampanoag were the first to receive the sun's rays each morning. In their cosmology, this made them the guardians of the day's beginning and the keepers of the sacred fire. Their history on this land does not begin in 1620. Archaeological and oral traditions confirm their presence for over 12,000 years. As the Laurentide ice sheet retreated at the end of the last ice age, the ancestors of the Wampanoag followed the shifting tundra and emerging forests. They witnessed the creation of the very islands, Noabe, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket, that would become the pillars of their maritime empire. The sacred geography, a land of water and wood. The Wampanoag territory, often called Wampanoag country, stretched from the eastern shores of Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island to the tip of Cape Cod, encompassing the surrounding islands. This was a land defined by its interstitial nature, the meeting point of saltwater and freshwater, forest and dune. The coastal summer capitals. Unlike the static cities of Europe, Wampanoag geography was seasonal. In the spring and summer, the nation moved to the coast to capitalize on the great migration of fish. The estuaries and salt marshes were not just scenery, they were high-calorie grocery stores. Here they harvested quahogs, soft-shell clams, and massive quantities of herring and alewives. The interior winter refuges. As the hard moon, winter, approached, the population moved several miles inland into sheltered valleys. The dense forests of oak, maple, and cedar provided a windbreak against Atlantic gales. This seasonal movement ensured that no single ecosystem was overexploited, a primitive yet highly effective form of sustainable environmental management. Architecture as engineering, the wetu and the longhouse. The Wampanoag home, the wetu, was a marvel of indigenous engineering. While European settlers lived in drafty, damp wooden shacks, the Wampanoag used the flexibility of the land. Construction. A wetu was built by driving flexible saplings, usually cedar, into the ground in a circle or oval, then bending them over and lashing them together at the top to form a dome. Insulation. The frame was covered with woven grass mats in the summer for ventilation and thick sheets of bark in the winter for insulation. A central fire hole allowed for heating and cooking, while the rounded shape allowed wind to flow over the structure rather than pushing against it. Mobility. The beauty of the wetu was its portability. When it was time to move seasons, the mats were rolled up and taken along, while the sapling frame was left to return to the earth, leaving a zero-carbon footprint. Maritime supremacy. The mishoon. If the wetu was the heart of the home, the mishoon, dugout canoe, was the engine of the economy. The Wampanoag were a maritime nation, and their ability to navigate the dangerous shoals of the Atlantic was legendary. The crafting process. A mishoon was created through a sophisticated controlled burning method. A massive white cedar or pine tree was felled. Instead of using axes to hollow it out, which could crack the wood, the builders used a slow-burning fire on top of the lock. As the wood charred, it was scraped away with stone tools or seashells. Hardening. This process did more than hollow the boat. The heat tempered or hardened the wood, making it resistant to rot and shipworms. Ocean-going capabilities. Large mishoons could be 40 to 50 feet long, capable of carrying dozens of warriors and tons of trade goods. These vessels allowed the Wampanoag to maintain a vast trade network that reached as far as the Great Lakes and the Mid-Atlantic. Environmental engineering and the wilderness myth. Early European explorers described the Wampanoag lands as a vacant wilderness. This was a profound misunderstanding. The landscape was a carefully curated garden. Controlled burns. The Wampanoag practiced regular, low-intensity understory burning. This cleared out invasive brush, returned nutrients to the soil, and created park-like forests. This made travel easier and encouraged the growth of sweet grasses that attracted deer, elk, and turkey, essentially farming wild game. The estuary weirs. They constructed complex fish weirs, maze-like fences made of stakes and brush in the rivers. These weirs allowed them to catch thousands of fish during the spring runs without depleting the population, ensuring a surplus for the winter.
The architecture of the Wampanoag Confederacy. The Wampanoag were not a singular tribe in the simplistic sense often portrayed in textbooks. They were a sophisticated confederacy, a voluntary political alliance of approximately 67 to 69 distinct villages. This structure allowed for a delicate balance between local autonomy and national unity. Village autonomy. Each village functioned like a city-state, managing its own agricultural lands, hunting grounds, and local disputes. The Grand Council. On matters of national importance, such as war with the Narragansett, major trade treaties, or responding to the arrival of Europeans, the leaders of these villages converged in a grand council. This was a masterclass in consensus-based democracy. Decisions were rarely forced. They were debated until a collective path was agreed upon, ensuring the people of the First Light acted with a single voice. The role of the sachem, power by persuasion. The leader of a Wampanoag village was known as a sachem. While the position was often hereditary, it was far from an absolute monarchy. A sachem's power was rooted in reputation, generosity, and wisdom rather than coercion. Servant leadership. A sachem was expected to be the most generous person in the village. They did not accumulate personal wealth. Instead, they redistributed the tribute, gifts of corn, fur, and meat, back to the widows, orphans, and those in need. Consent of the governed. If a sachem became tyrannical or made poor decisions, the people were free to leave and join a neighboring village. This voting with their feet ensured that leadership remained accountable to the people. The Council of Elders. Every sachem was advised by a council of respected elders and family heads. No major decision, especially regarding land use, could be made without the council's blessing. The Sangsqua, female sovereignty and matrilineal power. One of the most profound differences between Wampanoag and 17th century European society was the political power held by women. Wampanoag society was matrilineal, meaning lineage and property rights were traced through the mother. The woman sachem, Sangsqua. Women could and did serve as primary leaders. Historical records mentioned powerful Sangsquas, such as Wetamu of the Pocasset and Awashanks of the Sakanat. These women commanded armies, negotiated treaties, and held the final word on land transactions. Control of resources. Since women were the primary agriculturalists managing the Three Sisters crops, they essentially controlled the nation's food security. This economic power translated directly into political influence. A man could not lead effectively without the support of the women who sustained the community. The Peenies, the elite warrior mystics. To maintain the security of the Confederacy, the Wampanoag developed an elite class of warriors known as the Peenies, pronounced Peenies. These were not just soldiers, they were highly trained advisors and bodyguards to the sachem. The selection process. Potential Peenies were identified in childhood for their physical strength, courage, and mental discipline. Their training involved extreme physical trials, including long-distance running, cold water immersion, and surviving in the wilderness with minimal tools. Spiritual invulnerability. The Peenies were believed to be spiritually protected. It was said that through deep meditation and rituals involving the spirit Wôpanâak, they could become invulnerable to common weapons. Diplomatic role. In times of peace, the Peenies acted as the secret service and chief diplomats. Their presence during negotiations signaled that the sachem's words were backed by the most formidable force in the nation. Wampum, the constitutional fabric. The political identity of the Wampanoag was woven into wampum, beads handcrafted from the purple and white shells of the quagog and whelk. More than currency. While Europeans eventually used wampum as a form of money, for the Wampanoag it was a mnemonic device and a sacred record. Wampum belts as treaties. When a significant treaty or law was made, a specific wampum belt was woven. The patterns and colors represented specific clauses and agreements. The keeper of the belts. Each village had a keeper who would periodically read the belts to the community, ensuring that the oral history and legal obligations of the nation were never forgotten. To give wampum was to give one's word. To accept it was to enter into a sacred, binding contract.
The Great Dying, 1616 to 1619, a biological catastrophe. Before the Mayflower ever touched the shores of Patuxet, the Wampanoag Nation had already experienced an apocalypse. Between 1616 and 1619, a devastating pandemic, likely leptospirosis or a form of viral hepatitis introduced by European fishermen, swept through the coastal villages. The scale of the loss. In less than 3 years, the Wampanoag population was reduced by 70 to 90%. In many villages, the death rate was so high and so rapid that there were no survivors left to bury the dead. The ghost village of Patuxet. When the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, they chose the site of Patuxet, modern-day Plymouth, specifically because it was cleared land. In reality, it was a ghost village. The cornfields were already tilled and the caches of food were still there, but the inhabitants had all perished just months or years prior. Psychological impact. Beyond the physical loss, the Great Dying shattered the spiritual equilibrium of the nation. The Wampanoag believed that health was a sign of spiritual favor.
to see their people die while the Narragansett, their rivals to the west, were spared led to a crisis of faith and a desperate need for a new source of power or protection. The strategic logic of Massasoit Usamequin. When the great Sachem Massasoit Usamequin first observed the English settlers, he did not see pilgrims or religious refugees. He saw a small, sickly group of people who possessed thundersticks, muskets, and metal tools. The Narragansett threat. The Narragansett tribe, having been inland during the plague, remained 30,000 strong. They were pressing the Wampanoag to pay tribute and cede territory. Massasoit realized that his people were too weak to fight a two-front war. The decision to negotiate. For months, the Wampanoag watched the English from the woods, waiting to see if they would survive the winter. Once it was clear the English were staying, Massasoit made a calculated move on the chessboard. He decided to form an alliance with the English to use them as a military buffer against the Narragansett. The 1621 Treaty, a sovereign defense pact. In March 1621, the first formal diplomatic meeting took place. This was not a casual encounter, it was a summit between two sovereign powers. The role of the translators. The negotiation was made possible by Samoset, an Abenaki leader, and Tisquantum, Squanto. Squanto's story is particularly tragic. A Patuxet native who had been kidnapped by English explorers years earlier, sold into slavery in Spain, escaped to London and returned home only to find his entire village dead. He was the last of his kind, acting as a bridge between two worlds. Key clauses of the treaty. The written treaty was a mutual defense agreement. It stipulated that neither group would harm each other. If a Wampanoag harmed an Englishman, he would be sent to the English for punishment, and vice versa. They would leave their weapons behind when meeting for trade. Most importantly, if any unjust war was waged against either party, the other would provide military assistance. Sovereignty versus submission. Crucially, Massasoit did not view this as becoming a subject of King James. In his mind, he was an equal partner in a strategic alliance. The 1621 Harvest Feast. Diplomacy, not dinner. The event, now celebrated as the first Thanksgiving, was actually a high-tension diplomatic event. The arrival of the 90 warriors. When the English fired their muskets to celebrate a successful harvest, Massasoit arrived at the gates of Plymouth with 90 armed warriors. Historians believe he came not because he was invited, but because he thought the English were under attack or were preparing for a battle. The de-escalation. To ease the tension, Massasoit's men went out and killed 5 deer to contribute to the feast. For 3 days, the two groups ate together, played games, and conducted recreation. This was a formal renewal of their treaty. The economic foundation. During this time, the Wampanoag taught the Wampanoag the Three Sisters agricultural method, corn, beans, squash, and how to use fish as fertilizer. In exchange, the English provided metal knives, kettles, and a promise of protection. The Long Peace, 1621 to 1660. This alliance actually held for over 50 years, an incredibly long time in colonial history. It allowed the Wampanoag to rebuild their population and maintain their independence while the English settlement grew. However, underneath this peace, a slow-motion catastrophe was beginning as more English arrived, bringing with them a hunger for land that the Wampanoag could not have predicted in 1621.
Spiritual cosmology, oral traditions, and social fabric. The spiritual universe, balance of forces. For the Wampanoag, the world was not a collection of resources, but a living, breathing tapestry of spirits. Their spirituality was defined by a profound dualism, where order and chaos, creation and transformation existed in a constant, necessary tension. Kietan, the creator, the supreme being, Kietan, was believed to have created the first man and woman from a tree and a clay bank. He resided in the southwest, a direction associated with warmth, life-giving rains, and the destination of the soul after death. The southwest wind was seen as his breath, bringing the spring and the corn. Wôpanâak, the transformer. Often misunderstood by English Puritans as a devil figure, Wôpanâak was actually the spirit of the unknown and the supernatural. He appeared to the Pawas, medicine men, in the form of animals or shadows. While Kietan was distant and benevolent, Wôpanâak was immediate and powerful. He was invoked for healing, for victory in battle, and for protection against the unseen. Manitou. This was the underlying spiritual energy that inhabited everything. A rock, a river, or a hawk possessed its own Manitou. A successful hunter did not kill a deer. The deer offered itself to the hunter because the hunter had respected its spirit through ritual and prayer. Maushop cycle. Legends as geographic history. The Wampanoag used oral traditions to explain the geological changes of their homeland.
The most significant of these is the Maushop cycle. Maushop was a benevolent giant who acted as a protector and teacher to the people. The creation of the islands. According to legend, Maushop formed Nantucket and Noepe, Martha's Vineyard, by emptying the sand from his moccasins after a long journey. The fog often seen off the coast was believed to be the smoke from Maushop's giant pipe. The Cliffs of Aquinnah. The striking red clay cliffs of Gayhead, Aquinnah, are central to Wampanoag identity. Legend says the cliffs were stained red by the blood of whales that Maushop caught by hand and smashed against the cliffs to feed his family. The departure. Maushop eventually left the people as the white men began to arrive, turning himself and his children into whales and dolphins to escape the changing world. This legend served as a historical warning and a promise of cultural survival. Social organization, matrilineal integrity. The social fabric of the Wampanoag was woven through the matrilineal line, a concept that stood in stark contrast to the patriarchal systems of Europe. The clan system. A person's identity, clan membership, and inheritance were dictated by their mother. This ensured that the continuity of the village remained stable. Economic independence of women. Women were the primary farmers. Because they provided 70 to 80% of the caloric intake through the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, they held the purse strings of the nation. A man could hunt all season, but if he did not have a woman to process the meat and provide the agricultural base, he could not survive. Marital dynamics. Upon marriage, a man typically moved into his wife's family's wetu. If a marriage failed, the divorce was simple. The man would take his hunting tools and return to his mother's clan. There was no social stigma attached to this, as the focus remained on the well-being of the clan rather than the individual ego. The life cycle and coming of age. The Wampanoag viewed life as a series of transitions, each marked by specific rituals and spirit quests. Childhood, the naming. Children were often given temporary names based on their characteristics. They would receive a permanent adult name only after demonstrating a particular skill or having a significant spiritual vision. The vision quest. Upon reaching puberty, young men, and sometimes women, were sent into the wilderness to fast and meditate. They hoped to receive a vision from a spirit guide, usually an animal, that would define their path in the tribe, whether as a hunter, a warrior, a healer, or a political leader. Death and the journey. Death was treated with deep solemnity but not fear. The deceased were buried with their personal items, tools, wampum, pipes, to assist them on their journey to the House of Kiatan in the southwest.